Okay, everybody. So, welcome to this presentation about your first NEOS project. I'm Sebastian Kurfürst. If you look at the schedule, you'll see that originally this presentation was by Aske, a teammate of the Flow and NEOS team of myself, but he had to leave the conference a little early, so that's why I took over his presentation. So, yeah, about myself, that's my Twitter name. I'm a long-term committer on TYPO3, NEOS, and Flow since lots of years so far. And yeah, I've been involved in various parts of the project, and I'm really happy that I can give you this introduction about Flow and or about NEOS today. In my professional life, I'm also the founder of a company called Sensor Media, and we basically do web applications of or bigger web applications usually with technologies like Ember.js, Flow and NEOS also from time to time, and we also do a lot of consulting in that area. So, but that's pretty much about me. So just a quick question, who has installed NEOS already? Okay, quite some people, nice. Who has done his first project already? Also, a little few people, okay, very good. So, let's just quickly recap what has happened since the last year, since the last TYPO3 conference where we met, or some of you, we met some of you at least. At that point, we released, we announced the release date for 1.0. So that's also what we released on 10th of December last year. Middle of this year, we released 1.1. Now we are at T3CON, and the beta of 1.2 is right around the corner. So you see a lot has happened in that time. But that's just very important. NEOS is, of course, still stabilizing really rapidly. So if you look at Flow, for instance, our web application framework, when we released 1.0, it took about 1 year where like all these small detailed bugs you run into, they were fixed over time, you know, when the actual project started kicking in. And NEOS is currently right in the middle of this phase as well. So that means if you compare NEOS 1.0, 1.1, and also 1.2, you see lots and lots of bugs fixed, lots and lots of like details which you stumble over to smoothen the experience, and that will also continue with NEOS 1.3. So that's just an overview, so that you know that you know we are working very hard on stability, and I think has tremendously improved, and it can be used in projects. But of course, there are also some details or some things which don't yet work as smoothly as you would probably expect. Okay, so let's say you would like to learn NEOS as some integrator. The question is, what do you need to learn? Basically, it's two pieces. I would like to introduce that. So, if you have a normal web project, I guess with TYPO3 CMS, for instance, or it doesn't really matter, pretty early on there will be some kind of design of the website, essentially. So, in a classical web project, the design is pretty early, it's done pretty early on. Afterwards, we have the actual implementation, and then we have a lot of ping pong with our customers, you know, figuring out details, figuring out what works, what doesn't work, and at some point we have a release, and of course that can also like interleave, so these phases can like change, or we can jump back to a previous phase as well. And for NEOS, there's one more step, and that is extremely important. So if there's one thing to take away from this talk, is that NEOS imposes a little different way of working compared, for instance, to TYPO3 CMS, which is the first thing you will do is you will think about the content structure. And I'll explain what that means in a second. So that means before you even do your design, you look, okay, how is my content actually structured? And that is also very closely interleaved to the design process itself. I'll give you an example. In TYPO3 CMS, we have pages, we have text, we have images, we have something like columns in standard TYPO3 CMS. And they are stored in different database tables, and you all know that, I guess, a lot better than I do. In Neos, that's a little different. We only have nodes. So that means a node is something like a page, it can be something like a text, it can be something like an image, but it also can be something like a column, which is a container for nested nodes. So that means these nodes are structured hierarchically, so that's pretty much how what you know, like with TYPO3 CMS, that we have this page tree essentially. But the cool or the important thing is that the hierarchical structure does not stop at the page level, but goes down right to the individual element level. So that's a little compared to Templar Vala, for instance, where you are able to nest content into each other, basically. And that is right built into Neos, and that's also a reason for that's like baked into the core concept, essentially. And this node or this content structure, that is not even tied to the web, essentially. So here you see that is, of course, a website. So we have the website, the homepage, then we have the features website and the roadmap page. And in there we have this, what we call a content collection. So that is like a column in TYPO3 CMS. And that has some headline and some text in there. And these nodes all have some identifier, like Neos TYPO3 features, main, and so on. And they have a certain type. And the type of the node, that's page, headline, text, determines what properties a node, for instance, has. And if you look closely, you see a difference between, you see that there are roughly two main types. So we have something like pages and we have something like headline and text. And we call that the distinction between document nodes and content nodes. So a document node is essentially something like a page in TYPO3 CMS, but just more general. So that means it could be also a person, for instance, could be also a document node. It could be a production plant, for instance. It could be a construction site if you do some, I don't know, building website. It could be an offer to a customer, for instance. It could also be a tag or an author in your system, if that makes sense to you. Important is that a document is able to live on its own. So that means it has a URL, just like a page, and it contains some content which makes sense as a whole. You see. So if you take an arbitrary website, let's say Spiegel Online or I don't know BBC.com. If you would just take a single headline or a single paragraph of a text, that does not make sense to live on its own. But of course, an article is also a document that makes sense on its own. And then we have content. And content is essentially part of a document. And of course, as already described, it is also nested. So that means the content is just inside documents, as just explained. So that means content is something like a text, image, secondary content, a teaser, a slideshow, or a two-column element, for instance. And when you start with your project, basically what is important, you can create your own content and document types, and that is an extremely important feature. You will do that in your project. So if anybody uses Neos and just uses the built-in types, then if you have a medium-sized website, you're probably doing something wrong. So you will create your own document and also content types, depending on the website you will be doing. And if you start thinking or talking to your customer and discuss like what you have in mind and what the content structure is, and you start figuring that out, then you will see that from time to time it's pretty hard to distinguish if something should be a document or a content node, essentially. So as an example, a person is usually or very often a document. It makes sense on its own. A person has an identity, its name, for instance, or an email address. And you can have, if you have a website with articles, for instance, then this person document could contain the description of the author, for instance. But if you look if you have a website like, I don't know, a production or a product, or your company or creates some products, and you want to have one website or one site for each product, then you might have a contact person which is part of this product, you know, so that you can display for each product, okay, whom to contact if you want to order that, for instance. So in that case, a contact person would probably be a content node type. So that means it really depends on the project. And what we see usually when we do, like, when we're involved in projects, people new to that concept usually start creating lots of content node types, and later on figure out that some node types there can be shifted to document node types. So that's just something to be aware of. If you have experienced NEOS developers, they usually create more document node types compared to the starting user, essentially. So that's just something to be aware of, basically. So now we you got the basics of thinking about your content structure, and as already said, this is pretty abstract, you know. So it's not about the actual layout of your website yet. It's not about the actual the display of your content, but it's really just about how the content is intrinsically structured. But as said, this is the first step you will do. And then comes the second step, which is you have to think about how to render that content. So that is the part of output formatting. And there are quite some tools built into NEOS. The most important ones are TYPOScript and Fluid. And I'm not going to go into details of TYPOScript and Fluid now, because I think I think that's not the right place at this conference here. We are more trying to give you the big overview, where do you find all the resources you need, how do you find documentation. So that's why I don't show these concepts in detail now, but I show you how you can learn them. First, we have the NEOS documentation, and this has one part which is called the integrator guide. It can be found on docs.typo3.org, or you can also find it if you go to the neos.typo3.org website, and then it's pretty prominently linked, so you'll find the integrator guide. I think it's not yet like perfectly written. You know, we don't have any professional writers in our team, sadly, but still, it's pretty much information in there already, and it's usually better than people think of it. So if they didn't look at it, so I really invite you to look at that documentation and see if it helps you. But as said, of course, documentation can be always improved. That's for sure. This integrator guide gives you basically the overview about the different components we have, like TYPOScript, like EEL, flow query, Fluid, all these things, and shows them component-wise, so one component by the other. And then, if you do a project, you usually have some real-world use cases, or you have some specific problems you would like to solve. Like, I want to create my own content element. I want to add something to the inspector of NEOS, a property there. I want to create a different page layout, for instance. I want to render a menu, so stuff like that. That's like use case based. And for that, we have the Integrator's Cookbook, which already contains quite some stuff, but which is also greatly improved as in the next weeks. So we have people actively working on that, so it is useful to check this resource from time to time. And then we also have some basically non-official documentation, but they are also done by people of the team. So there is learnneos.com, done by the fine folks of network team, of Christopher, which is basically an interactive way, for instance, to learn TYPOScript as of now, but that can expand over time. So that means you have you get some ideas about how TYPOScript works, and there are like small challenges you can solve in that process right on this website. So you don't need NEOS at all for that. You can just do that all on the website. And they have also created this TYPOScript pocket reference here. You can download that on the as PDF. I think we don't have that many things here, right?
No, they didn't arrive in time, sadly. So just drop me an email on the site, find an email address, and I'll be happy to send you some.
Yeah. So that's just something also we try to have them available on like the next events and all these things. I have a few with me, but not very many.
I also have like 10.
Yeah, so you can, I'll be happy to provide you with that, but that's also pretty helpful. Then we have the Neos demo site, which is like our testbed of Neos functionality. And it basically contains lots and lots of functionality in there and best practices in there. You see how you create your own document notes there. We have a shared footer across all pages, for instance. So there are quite some things in there, and I invite you to look at that. It will be. It's also in the process of being redone currently, so there will be some changes on that in the next weeks and months. But that's a great resource nevertheless. But still, if you do your first Neos project, you will have some questions, obviously. Where to go with that? First, we have the forum of Neos, so forum.typo3.org, and then you find TYPO3 Neos there. It's also synchronized with news groups and mailing lists, just as the normal as part of the normal TYPO3 infrastructure. And everybody in the team and also the people surrounding the team, we try to answer pretty quickly. Of course, we can't promise anything, but we are giving our best to help you there if you have any specific problems. Then we usually hang out on IRC free.net, and there are 3 channels relevant. There's TYPO3 Flow, TYPO3 Neos, and TYPO3 Core Team, which we use there. So TYPO3 Flow and Neos is for users of Neos and Flow, so that's like where you will probably most likely post your questions in. If you're interested in getting to know how the whole development process works, what we're currently working on, what we are discussing, you're totally fine to join the TYPO3 Core Team channel. So that's not private in any way. Everybody can post there, but we just try to keep the questions, the integration questions in the Neos channel, and then discuss the further development in the Core Team channel. But as said, just drop by there if that's more your kind of thing. And of course, I just would like to mention that basically all of the core developers, as you know, we have to earn a living somewhere, so we usually have some companies, and it turned out in the past that 1 to 2 days of training are really effective for learning this integration work. So I personally have had one customer where we did it also using TeamViewer, and it worked pretty well, I have to say. And in like 1 day, they got the whole basics, not just the general overview like you get now, but really showing the details for their personal use case. So that's just, I guess, pretty helpful. And the most important thing for us is that if you have a problem, just approach us and ask us. Because some people think, well, yeah, these are these core devs and all these, these crazy guys building all that stuff. There's nothing special to it in any way. So we just, we put there a lot of energy in there, but we are totally happy to help anybody if there's a certain project. So let's say you've learned Neos a little, you have probably done your website of your company with it, or some other small example, and now you get a new project. And of course, that includes the question, should I use it or not? And Neos is not suited for every website, but it is suited for very, very many websites already. So we've built big magazine websites with it, like you've seen from Robert. Just these average, pretty big websites, interactive stuff. So there's already quite some examples there, and so you can build very many things with it. And please ask us there as well. If you have a new project coming up, you will get a suitable answer. You basically get some kind of risk assessment. If you need some special functionality and we don't see a way which is in Neos yet, then we can tell you, well, okay, it could be done this and that way, and this and that expensive probably. we'll also give you an honest answer if you need some features which are way off, but which take a long time. Then we'll probably also tell you, okay, no, that's probably not the right tool to use. What is just important is that you don't just look on this feature list thing, that you check, oh, I need these and these and these extensions or packages in Flow and NEOS, because the concept is very different. So that means functionality where you had to write some code in TYPO3 CMS is basically in NEOS usually just some configuration if you do it in a clever way, and then you just have to provide some bits where you really have to program. So that's why it usually doesn't help to see, oh, I need a news extension. That doesn't work in NEOS. Right. So let's say you decided to go for it, or asked, and we figured out some way and all that. Then the next question is, how do you organize your internal development process? You see, I'm trying to cover lots of different topics so that you get a broad overview about the whole life cycle of your project. First of all, of course, you need to get NEOS installed, not just for you, maybe, but also for your co-developers and all that. First thing, if you use Windows, I wouldn't install it natively using XAMPP or anything, because PHP in Windows is pretty crappy, I have to say, and the performance is pretty bad, and especially of file system operations in PHP. So that's why we don't recommend that currently. But we can recommend a few things also for these people. So most people in our team and the people involved in NEOS projects use Vagrant. Who knows Vagrant, by the way? Okay, who uses it? Okay, a few people. So it's basically a virtualization system where you can, based on VirtualBox usually. And I also included these links where you find some pre-defined virtual boxes or Vagrant boxes for the use of together with TYPO3 NEOS, so that you don't need to install anything anymore there. Right. So I personally, that's just a personal thing, I don't like Vagrant that much for my normal projects, because I feel it has this different, it's not my own computer, it's just a virtual machine running on my computer, and you need to connect to that and all these kind of things. So if you happen to use macOS, then we have built something based on an automation solution called Ansible, which is something like Chef or Puppet, if you have heard about that. So basically that configures your Mac system to install PHP, MySQL, all these things, and also makes sure NEOS runs really flawlessly. And if you use that, then it's just like one command to get NEOS up and running for a project on your physical machine. I just want to say this is an alternative we internally use and we are very happy with. So I guess you should just pick what suits you most. But of course, if you use Linux or especially Windows, that's not an option in that sense. And here's again the link. It's all open source, so I'll upload the presentation to SpeakerDeck afterwards, so you'll get all the links. And then by the nice folks at .de, there's this code Coon boxes, which you've probably seen outside in the lobby already. That is also a virtualized, so it's also based on VirtualBox, and so you can basically just put that into your laptop. There's a nice installer to it, and then you'll be greeted with the NEOS development VirtualBox essentially. The nice thing about that solution is that it has the deployment process already built in. That means, of course, for the .de servers, so that means that connects TYPO3 NEOS with hosting of TYPO3 NEOS at .de. Of course, they need to earn some money with it as well. So that's in the lobby asset. I just want to mention that as well. So if you look at NEOS, or TYPO3 Flow that is, everything we do is included in packages. So packages are basically like extensions in TYPO3 CMS, but the core of Neos and Flow is also a package. So that means there's just very, very little code outside a package. And that means that your website is also a package. That includes stuff like your assets, like your CSS, your JavaScript, your images. It includes stuff like your templates, your configuration, your node types, which you have defined. Of course, not your content. The content is stored in a database, but everything structural is in these packages. And as a package is essentially just a specially structured folder on your disk. You need some way to edit that. We all use PHP Storm. It costs some money, like 100 something euros, I think, but from my personal experience and also everybody else's, it's really well worth it, especially if you would like to develop things like has a great auto completion and so on. Who uses that, just out of interest? Okay, I don't need to say anything more. Okay, so basically your Neos project is some folder on disk. We use all Git. Who also uses Git? Okay, very nice. Who also uses Composer, by the way? Yeah, a little less people, but still. So Composer is a dependency and package management solution for PHP specifically. Basically, every web or every application platform has its own package management. You know, like Java has Maven. For JavaScript, there's stuff like Require.js, for instance, and Composer is for PHP projects. And it enables you to say, oh yeah, I need a certain package to connect to Facebook, for instance, and there are probably a few packages which connect to Facebook there. And if that package needs other dependencies, like a HTTP client, for instance, then Composer figures out what to load exactly, like what versions to load, and includes all of that into your project. So that is very helpful to handle these dependencies of your project. And if you look at TYPO3 Neos or Flow applications, that is the distribution of a Flow or Neos application. So it has some folders here like build, Composer, JSON, some configuration, some data, some packages, and then some readmes and stuff like that. So the important part is really the packages. Inside the packages folder, there's one level which is used for like categorization of packages. So like this application and framework and libraries, plugins and sites, it doesn't really have a technical relevance in like more or less, but pretty much not. And then inside comes the package, and here you see this package key, TYPO3 EAL, TYPO3 Flow, Fluid. And then we have stuff like robot lambda plug and block, and our own contact form, for instance. And inside the sites folder, we have, that's our website of our company. So that's called just Sandstorm public website, for instance. So, and that's where all, as I already said, where all resources of our website reside, all the templates, all the TypoScript, the node types we need, and so on and so on. So let's see what is managed by which systems. So of course, so in the application is Neos. In framework there is Flow in there essentially. That is managed by Composer. So inside this Composer JSON up there, you just define the dependencies which you need, and there you basically just say, okay, I want Neos in this and that version, and then Composer takes care to download the right stuff in there automatically. Then we have plugins, for instance, or code which should be shared across projects. And for these projects, it makes a lot of sense to, so basically you want to extract your shared code into custom Git repositories and custom packages as well. So that means that also, for instance, these plugins here, they are also managed by Composer. They are separate Git repositories and all these things. And importantly, this actual website itself, which is just one package in that case, but it could be also multiple packages, of course, we always include that in the main Git repository. So that means this here is not managed by Composer, but it's just part of this main Git repository for the whole distribution. And we, in the past, we have tried, basically everybody in the team has tried out both ways, I would say. But I think by now we have really pretty much settled on that structure. I don't know anybody who does it differently than that. as of now, because it makes it so much easier to work with. Because if you change something here and also need to change something here, you need like 3 or 4 steps to do. While if you do it like that without Composer for the side package, you just have one commit and that's it, and it's pretty easy to work with, especially because the site is the thing which changes most often in your daily development process of your website, because you adjust CSS, you adjust fluid templates, all these things. So that means this is what you will touch in your daily development process extremely often during the integration process. So just as a rule of thumb, try to minimize the number of Git repositories, but of course don't use 0. So use some Git, of course, but that is just very helpful for us. And what we currently do is that we also, if we have some functionality where we're not sure if it's usable for other projects or makes sense for other projects, we usually start by just including it in the main Git repository of this specific project. And at some point later on, when we figure out, oh yeah, we have done that for that project back then we extract it into an own Git repository. And so that's just how we do it, and some others as well. There's one small detail to catch, which is that, as already said, Composer, every Composer package has own dependencies and is able to, and that is specified in each package. And Composer, as already said, resolves that recursively, essentially. The problem with that mechanism now is that this folder is essentially not managed by Composer anymore, so that means that the dependencies specified in here are not taken into account. So that's not so nice, I would say. It's probably also something we will change at some point if we find the time to do that. But currently it's just important that if you add dependencies here, we always add that up here as well in the main Composer JSON. So this is for us just for reference, just for saying, okay, this is where what this package actually needs, and on top there is what is actually used. But I think this can change in the future at some point, that these dependencies are also resolved, because that would be, of course, more clean. And the second thing to be aware of is that you make sure you use a correct git ignore, which, who knows git ignore files? Okay, also everybody, almost. So in git ignore files, you basically say which directories should be managed by Git and which not inside a Git repository. And everything which is managed by Composer, so application and framework and libraries and plugins in most parts, that of course shouldn't be managed by Git. You don't want to commit that all to the main Git repository, because that's a huge mess if you do that. But of course you need to make sure that these things are part of the main Git repository. So, and by default, we currently just exclude the whole packages folder if you download the Neos-based distribution as of now. So you will need to adjust this git ignore file a little to cater for your specific project. Yeah. So, if you develop TYPO3 CMS, who has for the integration job, who is using a shared integration instance? Can you just raise your hand? Or like a shared system where you edit your content, for instance, where you install your plugins, where also the site integrator works using FTP or whatever. Who uses that? Okay, a few people who use it like locally, that they have it all on their own computer and all that. Okay, also some other people, right? That is for us currently still an open question. So for Neos, I think both cases might make sense depending on your actual your environment and the people you have in your teams. So of course the shared integration server is very nice because people don't need to install Neos. But of course, if you have a few people who want to collaborate and everybody. And you have one person doing very radical changes on the website, that will hinder the other people of developing further. So that means the integration server is, of course, very helpful for content editing, for providing the initial content to the website, for instance, and also smaller fixes, smaller changes to the website. But I think for most bigger parts of the project, and especially for kickstarting everything, you will most likely have individual instances. I think as a developer, you will always have personal instances, because if you write bigger chunks of PHP code, it is a lot easier if you work in development mode and all that. So yeah, that's just, but that's not finally like, there's no final best practice on that topic yet. I would just say it depends from team to team. If your team is familiar with Git, then you can easily do that using individual instances. If not, like if your teammates don't know how to resolve a Git conflict, then probably that is could be more the way to go. So there are some different ways to do that.
One quick question. With TYPO3 CMS, you have part of the configuration within the backend. I know EOS doesn't have a backend, but
like in a database, you mean?
Yeah. Is it sure that all configuration can be put in files there?
It must be put in files. So there is no configuration at all in any database in EOS. So it's all in files. Yeah. And they can be in the individual packages, but as well as globally, depending on what makes sense. So there are different places there. So if you use resources, like you have JavaScript and CSS, you probably minify this JavaScript, I hope at least. Or you compile, or if you use Sass and less, you probably compile them at some point. And we usually use Grunt for that, and some other teammates as well. Here's just a recipe. If you don't use that, how you can get easily started, for the minification and process and that. So that's just a detailed tip, essentially, which might be helpful for you when you start using EOS. That, of course, also applies to TYPO3 CMS or any other framework, totally independent of EOS. Also, if you, as you know, NEOS content editing doesn't have a backend in that sense, but you essentially edit the website as it is. But you know that we have these controls around the website, where you see the page or the document tree, where you see the inspector and all these things. Usually in bigger projects, you will want to customize your website a little when it is shown in the editing mode. For instance, if you have a mobile view, then you will probably have some CSS breakpoints which say, okay, starting at 200 pixels, I want to show the mobile view at 500 pixels. For NEOS, of course, the website, if you edit it, it's not just small 200 or 500 pixels wide, but it's a lot wider as it's in the normal browser window. But still, you can provide a mobile preview, essentially, if you take care of that. You can create your own preview mode in NEOS, and you should as well, if you would like to customize that, or your people work very much with mobile devices or for mobile end users. And then you will usually need a little CSS which says, okay, if the mobile preview is turned on, we always use this mobile view, and then we display it like in a smaller part of the whole website. And for that, you will probably adjust some CSS, and you will also, at some point, you are able to change the way JavaScript is handled to a certain extent. And that's why we have also some snippet for you which you can use in your projects to say, okay, this JavaScript should be only loaded when the editing mode is on, or this CSS should be only loaded when the editing mode is on or off, for instance. So that's just also a trick, basically, which is pretty handy in actual projects. Okay, now we have created our basic website. Now, of course, we need to deploy it somehow. Who uses a deployment tool by now? Okay, nobody? Oh, a few people, okay. So for NEOS, I wouldn't just use SCP, so that's not a good idea at all. Because NEOS and Flow is pretty powerful and also internally a pretty complex application. And we do lots of tricks to make sure this complex application is really fast when being deployed on the live website. So we employ a lot of caching, for instance, at very, very many places in Flow and NEOS. And if you change something, for instance, on your templates, then we need to flush some caches. And for development, when you don't want to do anything by hand, that should just happen as you develop. That's why we have different modes, basically a development and a production context, and in production contexts, we don't flush any caches, for instance, but we just pre-fill them, and then everything is there and pretty statically. Which means that if you develop your website and you want to release a new version, the first request to Neos would be pretty slow, because the caches need to be built. That takes maybe 10 seconds, maybe 20, maybe 30. So that means some people of your website will have some degraded experience, which is of course not nice. There might be some database updates which should be executed and all these things. So that means deploying Neos, especially if it's a high-profile website, you will definitely want to use TYPO3 Serve, which is an opinionated deployment tool, which basically has a certain way of doing things, and it has it does all these things like preparing the caches. You can also configure it, for instance, to run so-called smoke tests. So, which mean that if your website is almost ready, essentially, then you can do some testing, automated testing there. Like, is the homepage available? Does the features page contain some contents? Just very basic tests. And if some test of that failed, this website will not switch to the production website. So that means internally, we basically build up we deploy a new website essentially, and when everything is prepared and finished and tested, we just switch a pointer to this new website, which makes it also pretty easy if something goes wrong to go back to the old version. And that is how I think everybody of the team runs like our production deployments. I already said that Neos and Flow has these things called contexts, and that's just very important for me to mention. If you develop Neos and check it out by default, it's running in development context, which, as already explained, does quite some magic that you don't notice the caching. But this magic is also slower than it could be in production. So that's why never ever please host your website in development context for public users, because they will have a bad experience if you hit them with lots of requests. Instead, make sure that for the production usage, you use the production context, and you can do that using, for instance, using an environment variable that's all documented in the docs, and Serve, for instance, does it automatically. So that's just important to remember. And right. So now if we follow our steps, we have basically our first Neos website deployed, and we can iteratively work on new features, and we can iteratively push that to the production site, or to an integration instance, or to a demo stage which shows the customer what he can expect with the next release of your website, for instance. But it turns out that for more than just very simple websites, you will probably need some more, essentially. I mean, as you know, we don't usually just build simple static web pages anymore, but there is some interactivity at some point or the other, usually. So, of course, we need a way to handle that. And what you can do is you can develop plugins with TYPO3 Flow. So as you have probably heard by now, that Neos is underpinned by TYPO3 Flow, which is a pretty powerful application framework. You can very easily jump to Flow code, which is PHP code, and do anything you want there. You can use AOP, dependency injection, all these things we've talked about in the last conferences. So it's a very powerful framework which you can use for developing functionality which you need. But you shouldn't in most cases. Because as I already explained in the beginning, we have these custom node types, and it turned out beautifully. So that they can be used to implement lots and lots and lots of behavior which you usually would have written a plugin in TYPO3 CMS. So, for instance, for use cases like a listing of whatever things, news articles, Immobilien, I don't know the English word currently.
Properties. Properties.
Yeah, right. Or press releases, blogs, latest articles displaying a comment display, a tag cloud, or a carousel, for instance. there's no reason to write a plugin for that, because that can be very easily handled in Neos itself by using TypoScript. And there might be some like small functionality which is missing in TypoScript or in EL and FlowQuery for that, but we'll come to that later. So, but essentially that means you don't need to program these, like in the TR. There are like lots of extensions which just show a list or make these basic filtering, searching capabilities, and you usually don't need that in Neos anymore. Then you might ask yourself, okay, when do I need a plugin? And actually the rule of thumb is pretty simple. If you have interactivity on your website, then you will need a plugin. So that means if you have a form where the user can enter some content, then of course something has to be done with it. I mean, there's the form framework, so that's basically already handled. But if you have more advanced use cases, you will write probably pretty small plugins which take the data from the user, which register them somewhere or the like. And you will use plugins to integrate Flow and Neos with external systems of all kinds. So that is where, like, of course, which is not done by default, where you need to write some code. I've shown that we use the node tree, which is a tree of pages, or so of document and of content nodes. And pretty late in the process of developing Flow in Neos, we realized that a very important feature was actually missing from that. So that was, I think, like probably 1 year ago. It was really pretty close to 1.0. It was like the latest, biggest feature coming in right before the 1.0, which is node references. So that means you can store another node in the properties of a certain node. So let's say we want to tag our features page with currently hot as just some arbitrary tag. How could we do that? Of course, we could write some plugin which does the tagging and all these things, but we don't need to, because we can just say, okay, the features or a page can have a property which is called tag, for instance, and which contains a reference to another node of the type tag. And by that, Neos will automatically provide you a nice user interface for that in the inspector, where you can, it's basically a search form with auto-completion, so you can search for currently hot, for instance. You get the auto-completion, you click it, and that's how you connected a property of this node with this tag. You can also use multiple references if you need to. So if you, in your use case, you just don't want to tag, you don't want just to add one tag, but multiple ones, that is also covered. And when we thought about that, what consequences that had, we figured out that this actually solves lots and lots and lots of problems in real world. Stuff like tagging, as already explained. Stuff like having articles which have authors, related products, different, and because you can adjust the rendering as you would like to, you could, for instance, say, okay, if you visit the tag itself, you get a list of all the documents which are tagged with this document. You could easily just, that's just a little snippet of Fluid, a little snippet of TypoScript, and you can show the previews of the pages, for instance. And on this page itself, you could show a list of, okay, this is tagged with this and that, and you can link that together just using, without any programming at all. It's just a little TypoScript and Fluid. So basically, we have so that, to sum it up, the T3 content repository is essentially a tree, yeah, as you have seen, but you have something like symlinks available to make cross-reference across that tree for like secondary information. And it is very, it's very often the case that we have the actual websites at some point, and then at some other point of the tree we have stuff like imported products from an external system, or tags, as already in this example, or people which come from some LDAP system, for instance. And what we usually do in these cases is that we just we write some PHP which imports these things, like people or whatever, from external systems, and creates nodes for that of a specific type at a specific location of the tree, which then enables these referencing features and all these things. So I think that's a pretty powerful concept, which also for us, although we developed all that, we like, after we developed it, we figured out, oh well, that's even more powerful than we originally anticipated. So at least that was my feeling about it. So that's why it's extremely important to know about that. As I already said, TypoScript is the language to configure the rendering of NEOs. It has some subcomponents like flow query and eel. I don't want to explain that in detail at that point. The important thing to remember is that you can extend every bit of that. You can create your own TypoScript objects. You can create your own eel, what is called helpers, right? And you can create your own flow query operations. And these things are, so that means TypoScript at its core, it's an extremely extensible language. And what you'll often see is if you install an additional package of Flow or Neos, for instance, if you install the Elasticsearch package, which I'm going to talk about really soon, this just extends TypoScript. So it creates some new TypoScript objects, it creates some new eel helpers, basically, for making advanced search possible inside TypoScript. So that is a pattern which is pretty prevalent, that we, instead of creating huge monolithic code blocks, we just add some helpers here and there, which you can use yourself to solve your particular use case. And we just give you a very flexible toolbox to do that. So let's just highlight a few useful packages which are used in very, very many projects, at least the ones we usually do at, and not just we, but basically the whole team in different combinations. The first thing I would really like to recommend you is please embrace Elasticsearch and please learn Elasticsearch if you don't know about that. So I'll tell you a dirty little secret. The TYPO3 repository is good for storage, but it's not that performant for accessing. Especially, it is good for traversing the tree and all that, but it's not yet that good for finding arbitrary nodes somewhere based on some property. So if you want to find certain nodes, the most recent 10 articles in a certain section or anything like that, then just using the TYPO3CR natively without anything will be not so easy. Or at least it will be not so performant. It is possible, certainly, but it's pretty slow. Of course, the result is cached again, which makes it less of a hassle, but still, if you have 100,000 articles in your system, that will be a problem. And luckily, we are currently also, so the Elasticsearch package, which is referenced here, is solving all that, and it makes sure the whole content of your Neos installation is imported into Elasticsearch. So there's a very seamless integration. If you change content, it's automatically pushed to Elasticsearch. And you can do full text searching, but you can also do these set-based things like give me the latest 3 articles in this part of the website and order them by the first name of the author and I don't know what else. And what we have done afterwards, or what Christian has done afterwards, is he created a simple search package which is based on SQLite. And I expect that this will probably be what we will ship by default at some point. So definitely not in 1.2 anymore, but in 1.3, for instance, it could happen. Because it essentially enables the same set-based functionality I just explained. And it scales pretty well until like medium-sized websites, but of course for very huge websites that doesn't help. But I think in the future you will either use this one or this one. This is not yet so really stable yet, or it improves greatly, but that is just some area we are currently working on, and the projects I currently know use that one in production. So, right. Then you usually want to use some forms on your website in one way or the other. That's why we have, for Flow, we have built the form builder a while back, like 2 years back or something for a customer, but which is all open source. And so there is a form framework, and added to that is the form builder where you can click the forms together as you like them. And by Rens from the Netherlands, so also a team member, he has created an integration with Neos, which basically means that you have that inside Neos this form builder is integrated, and you can click your forms together there, and then on the website have a small plugin to say, oh yeah, this specific form should be inserted at that and that point. So if you need forms, then this is a good place to look at. And there are a lot of others, which I won't go through in detail yet, just to highlight that and to have that in the slides. So we have stuff like Mark has done a pretty advanced package Kickstarter, for instance, which is more powerful than the built-in one, which I didn't use myself yet, but it looks pretty nice. We have stuff like spam protection of email addresses, soft deletion of models, an SEO package, email obfuscation, exactly, a sitemap package, an embed package which you can use to embed YouTube gists or whatever you would like to. Or if the last one is a little special because it enables you to, if you are like us, you will, or we sometimes have the problem that while we develop a website, we see, oh yeah, this specific feature is missing in Neos or in Flow. So we try to bring it, or we code it, we put it to Garrett, so to our review system. But of course, we can't directly merge it. So that's why this package can be used, because we have code reviews and all that. And I can't just, I could do that, but of course, that's not how we work, that I can just create something and then just push it through. That's not what we do. So. But still, if I fix something with the last package, I am able to pull that single change from Garrett directly into my project. So that is also a nice helper if you need that. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned before that packages are useful when you have interaction. Mm-hmm. So we have two kinds of packages, the interaction ones and the ones with features which are not yet implemented.
Well, actually, a package is just a container for basically arbitrary things. It can contain PHP code, then it hooks into Flow at some pieces, it is a plugin, stuff like that. It can also contain node type definitions, as we've seen, which is just configuration, essentially. It can also contain some fluid templates, which are shared across many projects, for instance. So there are basically, a package is just an extremely general container, which is used for all kinds of these things. And these are just the packages specific to Neos. Of course, for Flow, there are loads and loads of, or at least a lot more packages of that. If you need specific features like, I don't know, LDAP or a single sign-on system or lots and lots of others. Right. Then one feature which is just important for you to know, we have an export and import system of content. Which is able to export your website to XML with all the assets and also import it back again. And that is pretty helpful, of course, for backups, but also for synchronizing content or pulling content from one website to another. Stuff like you have an integration system where you write your content master, and from time to time you need to have that locally for developing a new feature, for instance. And there is very helpful to export it and import it on your local machine, for instance. So that's not a big deal, basically, but it's just important to know that it exists. Okay, and then just to recap, there are quite some interesting upcoming features, which Robert has already talked about yesterday. The most important ones are multi-language, which comes in two flavors and two steps, basically. The one is content dimensions, which are the basics of multi-language. Which will be included in 1.2 where the beta release will be available in a few weeks. And the translation user interface with the split screen Robert has shown will be available probably in 1.3. We don't know for sure yet, but that's at least the plan for now. And the second really big feature is access controls, which is very far in the pipeline already, but which we will not merge that closely before the beta phase, because we expect that we forgot some things, so that's why we will merge it basically after the beta has been branched off, so that we have some more time to stabilize it and fix bugs we will probably have in the system. So that will be included in 1.3. Yeah, now I'm a little ahead of time, which is also pretty good, because I hope that we can now spend the time to, if you have any questions in whatever sense there is, and yeah, so we have like 20 minutes left to answer that questions. Yeah, I hope you learned something. As said, it was not this detailed, how do I do this and that, but more how is the general way of working, and I hope that is something which helps you in your projects and helps you embracing NEOS at one point or the other. So thank you.